summer of 2005, New Orleans is under attack.
It got scary, put it that way. It got real scary.
For the 100,000 people trapped by Hurricane Katrina, this will be a week from hell.
It honestly sounded like cars were landing on the roof, and it went pitch black. And then people started screaming.
Ferocious winds are followed by deadly floods.
In that situation, we know very few people are going to make it.
I was stuck, and the next thought was, how do I not drown?
The world is transfixed as disaster unfolds.
It feels like you're watching a third world country. You're like, this is not really happening.
And the most powerful government in the world is frozen by indecision.
The president, George W. Bush, was found utterly wanting.
There could be thousands, if not tens of thousands of people stranded. I immediately thought that this could be worse than 9/11.
It's Independence Day in New Orleans. And thousands take to the streets in celebration. Tonight the skies are clear, but in this part of the world, summer also means hurricane season. And 1,000 miles from here, it's well underway.
Only 5 weeks into the hurricane season, we were already on the letter D, so that's the 4th tropical storm of the season.
Over the next month, hurricanes pound the Caribbean. Sweep through the Gulf of Mexico and bombard the coast of America. When Jose hits Mexico on August the 22nd, it's the earliest the 10th storm has ever appeared.
So we knew things were going to ramp up further. We were sort of hanging on to our hats and thinking, what could happen next?
New Orleans has escaped the worst of the weather, but 5,000 miles away, an ill wind is blowing.
It's called the African Easterly Wave, and it happens where there's a difference in heat north to south across the western side of Africa, which allows a jet stream to develop.
Once it got over the North Atlantic, it got close to the Azore Islands. And so it gained more and more energy.
And it moved very quickly westwards towards the Bahamas.
The wind spun up faster and faster as the storm got higher and higher.
On the satellite picture, we saw more thunderstorms, and then Tropical Storm Katrina was born.
Katrina is headed straight for America, but not New Orleans. Its first target is Miami, Florida. As it approaches, it becomes a Category 1 hurricane with 75-mile-per-hour winds. It's the mildest rating possible, but for British backpacker Jamie Trout, it feels anything but.
It was the biggest storm I'd seen. There was debris flying around. It was just a howling sound outside. A lot of the locals were telling us not to worry, it's hurricane season, this happens all of the time. When we woke the next morning, there was quite a bit of damage. about ready to move on anyway, so we jumped on a bus to New Orleans.
Katrina takes a completely different route, moving out to sea and downgrading to a tropical storm.
Hurricane Katrina moved over Florida and came out the other side into the Gulf of Mexico. But it wandered a little bit, and the consensus was the south of the US had dodged a bullet.
It's Friday afternoon, and New Orleans is getting ready for the weekend.
I was hosting a family reunion, and we had a good time. Nobody's mind is really focused on even the possibility of a storm.
Kind of looked like maybe hit Alabama. I didn't think it was going to hit us.
I can remember talking to a coworker who was worried about it and saying, you know, it's never going to come here.
We paint this picture of New Orleans and we say Mardi Gras and look good. We're told to take hurricanes seriously, but New Orleans, we don't really take them seriously because we're so used to having so many of them. I think we never questioned the reality of how bad it could get.
Over 400 miles out at sea, Tropical Storm Katrina is finding a new lease of life.
Sea surface temperatures across the Gulf of Mexico were unbelievable. They peaked into the 30s. That's an immense amount of energy just waiting to be taken up by Katrina. The beast was getting bigger and bigger. Storm force winds extended 160 miles from its center. It was just gargantuan.
At the Louisiana State University, hurricane specialist Ivor Van Heerden is following Katrina's every move.
It just grew dramatically, and so at one stage was close to a Category 5 storm. This hurricane then started to curve northwards until we saw it was coming into New Orleans. And at that time, I went to one of my co-workers and I said, this is gonna be bad. This is it. This is the big one.
Word reaches the TV stations, and weather updates become increasingly alarming.
You watch the weatherman, and then you start hearing the reports, and all of a sudden it's a direct hit on New Orleans. Coming at you, and it's going to be bad.
We're watching on the news was talking about it, and the fear we saw in the newscasters' eyes that this was something that maybe we were not prepared for, looking at us and saying, people are gonna die. I would suggest you guys leave.
It was frightening. It felt a little like being in a horror movie, waiting for the monster to jump out.
Sunday morning, and the mayor of New Orleans turns to television to make a drastic announcement.
It's important to remember that New Orleans was founded as a city in 1718. And in 2005, there had never been a mandatory evacuation called for the city of New Orleans.
1.2 million people cram onto the highways.
It was very surreal getting on the highway. We headed north to Mississippi, and we still did not think that, you know, we're gonna be gone for more than a few days.
We said pack for 3 days, we'll come back, and we went into the contraflow. I was on the phone for hours begging all my friends to leave because as of that time, no one wanted to leave.
But many of the 100,000 still in the city would leave, if only they had the means.
There were a lot of people who were dear to me that stayed, who could not for whatever reason. They had no car, they had no way to get out.
If you have to drive for 6 or 7 hours, that's a certain amount of gas you have to spend. If you have to spend 2, 3, 4, 5 days in a hotel, is probably $1,000 in itself. It should be fairly easy for people not in New Orleans to understand why someone on August 29th might say, I can't do it. I can't leave right now.
Katrina is over 200 miles out, and her winds have picked up to 175 miles per hour. The hurricane is expected to hit the city's eastern wetlands first, and in the suburbs just beyond, fisherman Peter Garrica is busy preparing.
Took my smaller boat, 21-foot boat, and I kind of brought it in on the trail and tied it on the side of the house that if the water came up, it could float and it'd be right there by the house.
While Peter and his wife secure their home, his daughter Christina rounds up the family.
Where we live, when a big storm's coming, it's kind of the same procedure every time. I went to pick up my grandma. She was running around her house like a busy little bee, vacuum sealing what she could, putting it on top shelves, and then brought her back home. Kind of settled in for the evening.
You know, all that was preparation, you know, thinking about, you know, what could be the worst, but the worst was a lot worse than what you thought.
The streets within the city were pretty empty and almost barren. And those who could not get out were lining up outside the Superdome.
The Superdome football stadium is a refuge of last resort.
The Superdome was this kind of fortress of sorts that was strong enough to withstand the highest winds and where people would be safe.
Alongside 10,000 locals seeking shelter is a British backpacker fresh off the bus from Miami.
As backpackers, we didn't really have any options, so the advice was to go to the Superdome. There was a huge military presence, there were helicopters overhead, emergency vehicles everywhere, and you could just get a sense that this was a city in absolute crisis. The wind was starting to pick up and the clouds were coming in very grey, and you just got a sense that something huge was happening. And it was quite a sobering moment, actually, you know, like just suddenly realising that this was actually way more serious than we'd initially thought.
As night falls, the leading edge of the 400-mile-wide hurricane is bearing down on New Orleans. Jamal Raymond has decided to sit out the storm in his 5-story block of flats on the eastern edge of the city.
Skies got like black, you know, start getting dark. It started like raining kind of hard. So I say about 11 o'clock, that's when she came through. Ooh, that's how it sounds, like a ghost or something. The rain pouring up in the air, and it's not raining down here. The rain, it was raining up. I mean, raining. Like pouring going in the sky.
It started getting real rocky. I mean, you started getting wind that was, you know, rocking the house, and you could tell something big was happening.
Fisherman Peter Garrica and his family also have a front row seat for Katrina's arrival.
Yeah, I had my wife, I had my daughter came in, we had my mother. You know, we just was sitting there waiting and hoping for the best, you know?
You could feel the weather outside picking up. And being half Italian on both sides, the whole family's Catholic, and you had a religious altar on top of one of the dressers, and with little statuettes and whatnot. And as the night went on, there was a Blessed Mother figurine on the altar that the vibration was so bad, it just kept turning around. And my grandma would go over there and turn it the right way, and it would turn back around. And that kind of set an omen of be on edge, be aware, brace yourself.
Eight miles across town, journalist Jarvis DeBerry is hunkering down to ride out the storm at the offices of the local newspaper.
I heard this kind of like a high kind of whistling sound. Somebody rushed into the part of the building where I was and said a window has just blown out. If a window is blown out of this building, then game is on.
That's when the lights went out. Sound like a freight train outside, you know? Lightning and everything. You ever seen bluish green lighting? It was scary, you know? You got scary, put it that way. It got real scary.
As dawn breaks, Katrina envelops the city.
This is where we saw the highest wind speeds, with sustained winds of 133 miles an hour. I would be hanging on to my hats. I would be running for the hills. This was a massive storm, and it was going to annihilate the area.
At the Superdome, the city's largest hurricane-proof building is sheltering 15,000 people, including British backpacker Jamie Trout.
Over time, the winds build up and build up and build up. And then I remember hearing a huge crash, like a huge sound. And it honestly sounded like cars were landing on the roof. And they started getting louder and louder, like boom, 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 boom. A hole appeared in the roof, and water came in, and this howling, whistling sound came in. And right around then, the electricity went off, so the lights and the air conditioning went off, and it went pitch black. People started screaming, and as our eyes readjusted, we realized that everyone was just running up the stand of the seats and getting underneath into the walkways beneath the stadium. Everyone was really in shock, panicking.
As 130-mile-per-hour winds blast New Orleans, Katrina has another surprise in store. Forming within the hurricane are micro-tornadoes.
These micro-scale tornadoes can have winds in excess of 200 miles an hour. So that is even more destructive, and that can annihilate homes, houses, anything in its path.
Peter Garika is sheltering in his home in the eastern suburbs, along with his wife, mother, and daughter.
The whole thing in a nutshell about getting prepared is you cannot prepare for tornadoes.
My dad didn't tell us all of what he was seeing. And for the most part, I'm glad, because it would have made things even scarier.
The house was starting to get where you could see the chandeliers move, you know?
We moved into his bedroom in the middle of the house. The power had gone out by that time.
I could see daylight through the wall. And that was from it shaking and rocking.
And when I looked to like my left towards the driveway side, you could see there was a gap. There was something missing. I was watching things fly out the attic, like blankets, pictures of my cousins, all kind of random things.
And this is right about the time when the tornado started doing its thing.
You could feel the pressure just changed.
It sounded like cattle running across the roof. You just heard this rumbling like hoofs running across the roof. And I guess what it was is all the shingles and the sheeting and all just imploding on the roof.
The sounds Peter can hear signal the rapid approach of a micro-tornado.
And that's when everything just went.
One minute you're looking at ceiling, the next minute you're looking at sky. And then things start falling apart.
It felt like the floor lifted up and then came back down. And then the carpet like went out from underneath me. The wall I was staring at charged at me. I fell backwards, and that was it. I thought I was dead.
Hurricane Katrina is tearing through New Orleans, where over 100,000 people are sheltering from winds of over 130 miles per hour.
You're just waiting, hoping that the stadium's going to hold. Once we found refuge underneath the seats in the stadium, you start thinking about family and are you going to get out of here safe? It was just feeling completely helpless. You're totally out. Nothing is in your control. You start worrying about what's happening to other people around the city.
At this point, nobody knows how many have died from collapsed buildings and falling debris. But as the hurricane heads towards the city, it not only brings destructive winds, it carries with it a wall of water called a storm surge.
This is where water is almost picked up and thrown towards the coast. This happens because the hurricane is a huge area of low pressure. Low pressure means less air. The weight of the air is less, basically lifting up the water and almost dumping it on land.
Surge. Oh my God, look at that. That's the storm surge coming in. Look at the storm surge coming in.
Katrina carries a 25-foot wall of water toward the city. First in its crosshairs are the eastern suburbs, where Peter Carica's house has just been demolished by a 200-mile-per-hour tornado.
My wife was there. We had my mother, and myself. And I didn't see my daughter because my daughter was still on the floor of the house. And she might have been knocked out, I don't know.
Before Peter can look for his missing daughter, Christina, the storm surge strikes.
It went down quick. The water was coming up so fast, it was like somebody just filling up a bathtub with a fire hose.
Just 20 feet away, Christina is lying unconscious.
The next thing I knew, I was underwater and stuck to something. My pants had gotten hung up on the fence that was out front, and the water was rapidly rising. Once I realized that it was just my pants, I kind of ripped and got out of that. And the next thought was, how do I not drown? I couldn't really breathe well. It was so cold, and then for whatever reason, anytime I tried to take a breath, it was like if I was in a corset or something made of nails. And I had no idea what was going on. It was just like a sea of stuff and water. My bedroom door happened to be nearby, but even on the door, it was hard to hang on.
The rest of Christina's family is in the garden, desperately looking for safe haven.
By that time, the water had got over the fence. I get to the tree and I found a cable there, And I tie that around my mama so she don't just drift off in case she can't hold on. And just trying to figure out, the water's coming up rapidly, we're gonna run out of tree. Well, it wasn't a big tree to start off with. At that point, I'm talking to my mom and I notice my wife's gone. My wife disappeared. She drifted off. She couldn't hold on anymore. And that's when I seen my daughter and the dog.
I heard my dad scream my mom's name. And so I swam over to him and got in a tree.
So we had my mother, myself, my daughter, and the dog in a tree, and wondering where my wife's at.
By that point in time, my mom was already out of sight. So I was afraid to ask, was she okay?
As a wall of seawater charges west, the storm surge's next victim is the city itself and its centuries-old flood defenses. A year before Katrina hit, New Orleans was in the midst of a long-term upgrade of its levee system.
If you come to New Orleans, you will see these huge levees holding the river in because the Mississippi River naturally floods every year.
Since the early 18th century, engineers in New Orleans built what are known as levees, huge brick or concrete walls to channel the river and hundreds of canals safely through the city.
New Orleans is so low topographically. The downside of that, though, is that when those levees fail, then the whole city is at risk of going under.
In the early 21st century, many of the oldest levees were strengthened, but hurricanes had also been getting stronger and more frequent, and Ivor Van Heerden was concerned.
I put a lot of effort into putting a team together to develop storm surge models. Because of those, I knew just how vulnerable New Orleans was to flooding.
Ivor's computer simulations warned that levee breaches to either the Mississippi River or Lake Pontchartrain to the north could cause billions of additional gallons of water to descend upon the low-lying city.
I hate to say this, but from way out, I had this real dread, this feeling in the bottom of my stomach that we were going to see a catastrophe.
In the north of the city, Fire Captain Joe Fincher is keeping watch over the levees of Lake Pontchartrain.
The whole area is filling up with water, and it was flooded. And my firefighter looked over, and he said, "Captain, it looks like the levees broke over there." And I looked, and my heart sank. I said, "Man, I think you're right. I saw it." And at first, it was like a small breach, I would say 6 to 10 feet wide, and the water was just pouring in like, I don't know how to describe it.
Within an hour, the force of water rushing out of the lake has cut an enormous hole in the flood defenses.
The landscape I saw was just devastation. By that time, it was a 200-foot breach in the levee, and we couldn't drive because there was water surrounding us. The water at that point was 10 feet deep in places. As soon as I saw the levee break, I immediately thought that this could be worse than 9/11. It was sobering that there could be, thousands, if not tens of thousands of people stranded.
What Joe Fincher is seeing is happening at multiple locations across the city, and floodwaters are beginning to engulf entire houses.
You had these breaches later in mid-morning, the 17th Street Canal, where the wall just literally slid. It slid about 60 to 70 feet. The whole section of the wall slid and fell down. Imagine you wake up to use the bathroom and you step out of your bed and your feet get wet. And you lick the water and it's salty. And your kid's in there. and they're sleeping, and it's dark, and there's no electricity. You can't go outside, the water's rising. So what do? You try and get in your attic. So imagine the panic.
It looked like the apocalypse, it really did.
"14 hours after Katrina began its assault on the city, the hurricane finally passes.
Katrina lost a lot of energy as it made landfall. Hurricanes need the warm seas to fuel them. And ultimately, it just disintegrates, it rains out. It's not really till the afternoon where the winds slowly lose the worst of their sting.
The winds have died, but floodwaters have not dropped. 20 miles away, British reporter Kami Nzerim is trying to find a way into the city on one of the few remaining roads.
We've just got to the community of Covington, which is just north of New Orleans across the lake.
We slowly made our way around the edge of Lake Pontchartrain on the other side of New Orleans. And honestly, it looked like a nuclear bomb had gone off. The place was flattened. We began to hear stories that entire districts were lying underwater, that in some cases, houses were completely submerged. There were entire parishes that had been completely devastated. Bodies were floating in the water in the lower 9th Ward.
In the west of the city, where flooding is less severe, Jarvis DeBerry decides to leave the shelter of his office and head east to see the disaster with his own eyes.
We got out on the interstate and it's elevated so we can look down on the city. We see people in real trouble and see people in real distress. See people that to this day, I don't know if they survived or not. We went as far as we could go. I remember in particular, someone holding on to this big water cooler and he has his arms thrown across there to try to keep his head above water. I'd never seen people that I'm looking at who were at risk of drowning. And there was a sense of helplessness. I couldn't help them. You know, I couldn't rescue anyone. I just never seen anything like that before in my life.
In the 9th Ward, the reason for the extreme floodwaters is clear. The industrial canal has burst, and water is still pouring in.
2 big sections failed. One so badly that a barge floated out from the canal over the breach and landed on a house. This should never have happened.
The predictions seemed to me to have been true. They were in real life-threatening danger.
It's 2 hours since Hurricane Katrina's winds died away, and tens of thousands are still trapped. News is beginning to filter out of the city, and the major networks are quick to react to the horror.
Here in Slidell, 300 are estimated to have died, mainly in their attics, trying to escape the rising waters. Beachfront homes are matchwood, roofs and boats enmeshed in the wreckage.
For those lucky enough to evacuate before Katrina hit, this is their first sight of a disaster taking place back home.
We got to the hotel in Dallas. We're watching on the news the destruction in real time. It's surreal that you're watching the place you grew up in on television. It feels like you're watching a third world country. You're like, this is not really happening. And at that point, I think it hit my parents that there is no way that our house survived that. But also, you feel guilty because you made it out and others haven't.
In the eastern suburbs, fisherman Peter Carica has spent the past 7 hours clinging to a tree alongside his mother and daughter.
I lost my wife, and all I was thinking about is I hope she grabbed onto something on the way out. I could see that the little boat that was on the side of the house was still floating. So I swam off. When I swam off, my mom said, "You're gonna die if you swim off." I said, "Well, if I'm gonna die trying," you know?
My grandma the whole time just kept telling him all kind of, "Oh, you're gonna die." But once he got to the little boat and he was getting it, you know, where I could see him getting to us, it was just a wave of relief.
So after I got them secure, get up on the rigging of the boat, because they had rigging that was about, maybe put you about 13 feet above ground level, and look around and see if I could spot my wife.
My dad did his best to figure out where my mom was. And I remember my grandma and I just praying and hoping that she was okay.
I was howling for her. And that's when I caught her. And I could see her with a stick with a piece of plastic on it, waving it, trying to get my attention.
Peter's wife has been washed a block away and is clinging to debris from the destroyed homes.
She was weak, and I was getting weak by that time.
All things considered, my mom was in better condition than the rest of us, really.
You know, it's a miracle, really, that I could get in there and get her out of there. Hey, what do you call it? Guardian angels, I guess.
1,000 miles away in Washington, Katrina is designated a national disaster. The job of responding falls to the Federal Emergency Management Agency, known as FEMA. As for the White House, President Bush is on holiday at his ranch in Texas, where allegedly his staff don't want to burden him with details on the situation.
George W. Bush was grappling with wars overseas that were going really, really badly. The last thing he needed was a massive domestic crisis.
New Orleans is on its own. And it's left to the local emergency services to improvise a rescue plan.
Everything that could go wrong went wrong, but if you hear of a house burning or someone trapped, It's sort of like instinctive to go for it and go help someone, you know? So that's pretty much the mentality of the whole fire department from what I saw. We knew that there would be, you know, rescues that we had to make. We couldn't access it through fire trucks because you couldn't get around. We had a couple of guys that were really good with boats and all. We saw a boat in the backyard of someone. They were able to hotwire the boat and get it into operation. We sort of knew to do a grid search to figure out, you know, what places needed to be searched first. So we would go into a neighborhood and it was pretty silent. We would turn the boat motor off and yell, make some noise, so we would know where they were.
A fire crew hears a cry coming from an almost fully submerged house.
A couple of blocks from us, they found somebody yelling out of a bathroom window. And it was a guy that was standing on his toes, apparently, on top of the bathtub, with his head barely above the water. He wouldn't have made it much longer, so they were able to pull him out. And over the next few hours, we had probably, say, 30, 40, 50 people. We just tried to do as much as we could. We realized that we were fighting against time. So, yeah, it was sobering.
Eight Coast Guard helicopters arrived from across Louisiana and its neighboring states.
It was a big mix. People on roofs, people on second floor landings. Some people were stuck in, you know, single stories.
The choppers begin round-the-clock sorties, plucking people from rooftops and taking them to the Superdome.
It was impressive. All the first responders from the Coast Guard, they were great.
The first few thousand to be rescued joined the growing crowd at the giant stadium.
There was something like another 20,000 people that arrived. So it was kind of the first realization that, yes, the hurricane had passed, but that we were still very much in the depths of a crisis.
As the sun sets over the Superdome, across the ruined city, tens of thousands more face another night stranded in their homes and huddled in attics. It's Tuesday morning, and journalist Jarvis DeBerry wakes at his desk at the New Orleans local newspaper.
One person rushes into the room and tells the photographer, grab your camera, you gotta see this. So we all get up and we all rush to the window. And there is this steady, 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 steady rising of water that seems inexplicable.
Incredibly, the west of the city that escaped yesterday's storm surge is now flooding.
As far as we could see, it wasn't a landscape anymore, it was a waterscape. It was a real mystery to people that they could be flooding after the storm had gone.
And all of a sudden, this water's rising so fast. Well, that means that we've got breaches, we've got serious breaches.
Ivor Van Heerden takes to the air to look for the source of the new flooding.
And so I slowly but surely went from Levy breach to Levy breach. And what we realized very, very early on was that most of the levees we saw were catastrophic structural failures. The levees failed in mass, just hundreds and hundreds of feet. They just fell over. The waves chewed up the levee banks and boom, they went down. So if you look at New Orleans, there are about 350 miles of levee. Over half of those failed. I mean, that just gives you a scale of the event. In the lower 9th Ward, when we flew over, the water had got above the eaves. It probably flooded the houses. And in that situation, we know very few people are going to make it. I saw 2 young children floating face down in the water. And I'm sorry. I eventually met their mother, and she told me that they were divorced and they were with their father. You know, but that's a memory that's very hard for me. I'm sorry.
We were watching the rise in the water, and we realized that we were fighting against time.
Government help is slow coming, but local Louisianans aren't waiting for Washington.
I saw an armada of boats. There were 40 or 50 boats coming my way. It was a beautiful sight. It turned out to be the Cajun Navy, so that was beautiful.
From across the state, private boat owners have answered New Orleans' cry for help. They're quickly given the nickname, the Cajun Navy.
It was really down to local people, local volunteers, neighbors, friends helping each other out. The Cajun Navy taking it upon themselves to find out who in their neighborhood was most needy and trying to get them to some kind of safety.
So we had a huge operation. We were getting hundreds of people out that day. They were movers and shakers. There's a saying with the Marines, it says, improvise, adapt, overcome, you know?
As survivors escape the rising waters, thousands more head for the sanctuary of the Superdome, as well as the nearby convention center. But their relief is short-lived.
Outside the convention center where people are gathering organically, there is nothing. There's no food, there's no water, there's no real shelter. And even though there were individuals being rescued from high water, there is not, at least in those first couple of days, any large-scale coordinated operation to get people out of the city, which is what's most desperately needed.
In the wake of Hurricane Katrina, thousands are still stranded in New Orleans. In the worst-hit eastern district of the city, Jamal and his mother have run out of drinking water.
My mama didn't want to leave. She was gonna stay. And I said, Mama, you gotta get out of here. We gotta get you out of here.
Jamal decides to attempt a 2-mile swim to the Superdome, with his mother perched on a makeshift raft.
As you go out, the water was like up to my chin, like. You were like, you know, I had to like swim. I bounce up and down in it. We managed to get to the bridge. You can go up the bridge and you get over to get to the Superdome.
After a couple of hours, Jamal and his mother make it.
She a tough cookie, you know. She's still living. She's 91 years old. But when we got to the Superdome, you know, it was crazy. It was chaos. You wouldn't want her to go in there. It was filthy.
The Superdome protected 15,000 people during the storm, but now that number has swollen to 25,000.
You couldn't use a bathroom. It was like, man, it was like living like animals, man. People fighting, screaming and hollering and talking crazy. And it was crazy.
As fatigue sets in and tempers fray, troubling rumors begin to circulate in the crowd.
We'd heard that there were people who were swimming to the Superdome who were attacked by crocodiles. We'd heard that people had been swimming to the Superdome and were electrocuted on the way. We'd heard that there had been people stabbed in the Superdome and that bodies were being kept in the basement. It felt like at the time that there were just the most horrendous things happening, but I had no way of verifying these rumors and whether these things actually did happen.
Not all rumors are emanating from the Superdome. The media jumps on the disaster and paints a picture of lawlessness throughout the city.
One of the most galling things for me as a black journalist covering Katrina was seeing the way that black communities in desperate need were portrayed as brigands and villains and looters.
People were human beings trying to survive a shockingly desperate type of circumstance. There was nothing that one could say about people in New Orleans during the week of Katrina that people would not believe. You could have said anything and everything, and people did. They were raping babies in the Superdome. They were slitting people's throats. They were doing they were shooting down helicopters.
I didn't really see any looting going on. I've seen a lot of dead bodies, and I saved a few people.
Despite the numerous reports of violence, very few have been proven.
It was fantastical, slanderous, racist.
The vast majority were completely good people that were trying to look out for each other.
After 3 days, President George Bush flies home from his holiday. En route, Air Force One circles over the stricken city.
I think if he had come to the city and touched down, not just flown over the city, but actually touched down, he would have had a better idea. It's the kind of thing you can't experience secondhand.
It was chaos when we drove in. Camps that had been set up under motorway flyovers, rather than a consistent and coordinated governmental response. There wasn't enough food, there wasn't enough bedding. It was down to well-meaning local shopkeepers, largely, providing water. The official response was found terribly, terribly wanting.
As the crisis moves into a 4th day, there's some good news for Jamie. Local state troopers are gathering stranded foreigners for evacuation.
We had made contact with one of the senior officers who'd said that because we were international travelers, we were allowed to leave the Superdome. We obviously jumped at the opportunity to get out of there, and it's only in the years subsequently that I've reflected on that and wondered what were the reasons, the motives for allowing us international travellers out, where the local people were actually told and made to stay there in the Superdome.
With growing outrage at the government's slow response, President Bush finally triggers a large-scale military intervention and sends in the 82nd Airborne Division. But at the Superdome, the presence of armed soldiers threatens to escalate an already tense situation.
Looked like somebody had popped a firecracker or something. I thought I was gonna die then because the soldiers, they took it, cocked their guns back, and said, "Get down, motherfuckers, we're gonna shoot all y'all."
In New Orleans, the cavalry has finally arrived. But not everyone is happy at the presence of armed peacekeepers.
So now you have the National Guard coming into town, and they had to have heard all of these things, you know, the depravity of the people who were left in the city. And so to the people of New Orleans, it was scary.
In command of the troops is charismatic General Russell Honoré.
Russell Honoré swaggered into town and really took charge of the situation.
Put those damn weapons down! Not gonna play you again, goddammit! Get those goddamn weapons down!
His specific command was put those goddamn weapons down. Like, these are people, these are not your enemy combatants.
Put those weapons down, damn it! Swing them!
And that was important because New Orleans and the people of New Orleans had been slandered that entire week.
Hey, weapons down!
I think what was most significant and important about him was that he cared about the people.
The general's first priority is the large-scale evacuation of survivors who are given refuge in nearby cities.
Yeah, they took us to Texas. I had a good time.
We were refugees, right? I never saw myself like that, but after Katrina, we became this kind of story. We totally were known as the Katrina people.
I made friends with National Guard guys. They came up to the boat when I was still sitting on the boat that 6 days I stood there. And they said, well, you know, it's not safe. I said, it's safe enough. I said, I got 2 rusty guns that I survived, you know, and I think I'm in good shape, you know. I said, don't worry about me. Go try to find somebody else, you know. You could, you know, safely say that we on our way to recovery.
That'll work.
13 days after Katrina strikes, George Bush finally touches down in New Orleans. And he's keen to show the world he cares. In tow is FEMA's director, Michael Brown, and the president angers many when he congratulates the man in overall charge of the government response.
Again, I want to thank you all for, and Brownie, you're doing a heck of a job. The FEMA director's working 24.
I'll never forget, heck of a job, Brownie, when the FEMA director really was not doing a whole lot, should have been doing a whole lot more.
In the following months, 1,577 people are declared dead in the state of Louisiana, most from New Orleans. As survivors return, they are faced with the challenge of rebuilding their homes.
First impression is really the smell. When you would get out of the car, there was just this musty, moldy, old, ancient smell. There was no life. There were no bugs, there were no birds, and it was very, very eerie. Just, it felt like a wasteland, like the apocalypse.
You know, my wife was okay, my daughter was okay, still had my mom, still had the dog. You know, you just gotta drive on and just look forward. I built my house, stronger than what I had before.
But not everyone is able to return. Some of the damage to the poorer neighborhoods is irreparable.
And so Baltimore became a new home, and the beginning of us putting our heads together on how to start over.
I remember going back to the first Mardi Gras after Katrina had struck, and everyone was really, really conscious that it felt much whiter than it had before Katrina, merely because the black population of New Orleans had not yet been rebuilt. And of course, it was largely the black population that had been so devastated by Katrina because they lived generally in the less well-off areas that lay below sea level. When the levees broke, those parts of the city were completely submerged.
So amongst all the doom and gloom, one can wonder, what's the future of New Orleans? You know, I love this city.
Today, New Orleans has a $14 billion levee system to protect the city if another Katrina hits in the near future. And people like Ivor are pushing the government to think even further ahead.
Earlier this year, the National Ocean and Atmospheric Administration came out with their predictions of sea level rise across the United States in the future. And in Louisiana, by 2050, sea level's gonna rise at least 2 feet. And by 2100, it's gonna rise 4 feet. Now just imagine you got the storm surge that hit Katrina in 2005. All the levees around New Orleans are basically too low for 2100 standards.
The plain fact is this: much of New Orleans lies below sea level, but it is life and home to one of the most vibrant cities in America. We can't just write it off.
We're gonna have a bad storm again. We're gonna have flooding again. To have infrastructure being taken care of, to not go through the same things over and over again. This city deserves more.